Arc Horizon. Prologue. The world that waited Planet X doesn't orbit. It lingers, a black silhouette carved into starlight. It absorbs more than light. It swallows sense. In its presence, compasses spin, chronometers lag, and voices echo in reverse. The atmosphere? Barely there. Thin, metallic, like breathing in rust. The sky is a washed-out void, not black, not gray, something in between. Colors have no name. Shadows fall in impossible directions. Even light seems afraid to land here. The surface is a vast plain of obsidian dust, fine as ash, covering ruins that defy geometry. Towers that stretch in spirals, never upward. Archways that lead back to where you entered. Walls that hum. And always, the sound. Not a roar. Not a whisper. Something in between, like the low breath of a machine that's been awake far too long. Pilots say their helmets fog from the inside. Their thoughts wander. They hear their own voices, but not in their heads, in the air around them. One soldier described it as a feeling of being remembered by something you've never met. Another broke rank, fell to his knees and whispered, "This is where God went to die. No sun shines here, no stars reflect, and yet it watches. Planet X isn't just a world. It's a memory, a forgotten place, pulled back into existence by something ancient, patient, and hungry. Dark Horizon has opened, and what lies beyond is no longer content to be unseen." Chapter 1. Echoes of the Forgotten. The ship hovered suspended in the air above Planet X's surface, its engines making the faintest hum. Below, the obsidian plain stretched out in endless, surreal expanse. The crew aboard the Argent Wind had seen many strange worlds, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt alive in the way this place did. Commander Lyra Davin stood by the viewport, her eyes narrowing as she gazed at the terrain. Her fingers traced the edges of a map that had long since ceased to make sense, the once precise coordinates, now blurring and shifting with each glance. She could feel the pull of the planet, the strange gravity of it, as if the very atmosphere was trying to rewrite her thoughts. "How much longer until we can make landfall?" she asked, her voice steady, though there was a tension in her shoulders that betrayed her calm. Lieutenant Davin, the ship's navigator, glanced up from the control panel. His face was pale, eyes wide from lack of sleep. "Another hour, maybe less, Commander. But the readings are inconsistent. I'm having trouble locking onto any stable landing zones." Lyra's lips tightened. "I know, keep trying. We need to find something, anything that resembles a place we can set foot on." The last transmission they had received from the previous expedition to Planet X was garbled and fragmented, the voices barely intelligible, distorted by something she couldn't yet grasp. And then nothing. No further communications. They had come in search of answers, of the missing crew, and now they were descending into the unknown themselves. Suddenly, the ship's lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the metallic walls of the command deck. Davin's hands flew over the controls, but the flickering persisted, the hum of the engines growing louder in the eerie silence. "Damn it, there's something interfering with the systems. We're losing power in certain sections of the ship." "Is it the planet's atmosphere?" Lyra asked, trying to mask the growing unease in her voice. "I'm not sure. It's more like something is reaching out to us." A chill ran down her spine. She had heard the reports, the rumors, the whispered warnings of those who had visited Planet X before. Words like reality distortion and psychic disturbance had been used, but until now, it had all felt like nothing more than overblown fears, superstitions carried from one doomed crew to the next. But standing here, on the precipice of something unknown, something ancient, she couldn't ignore the creeping sense that those fears might be real. "Is there any signal from the surface?" Lyra asked, already knowing the answer. "None. It's as if the planet itself is blocking us." Davin's voice was tinged with awe, fear, and something else, something unspoken. "This place doesn't want us here, Commander." Lyra turned her back on the viewport, her mind already racing. "Prep the landing gear. We'll make our own way down. I don't care if it's an anomaly or a malfunction. We're not turning back, not yet." As the crew moved to execute her orders, the ship rumbled once more, louder this time. A voice echoed through the comm system. It was faint, distorted, but clear enough to be heard. "Don't come here. You won't leave." The words sent a ripple of dread through the crew. They all froze, their eyes locking in shared horror. "Who was that?" Davin whispered, his voice barely audible. "There's no one else out there," Lyra said, but even she didn't believe her own words. In the eerie quiet that followed, the only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the planet, like the heartbeat of something far older than the stars themselves. As the Argent Wind began its descent, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't approaching a world. They were being drawn into something that was watching, waiting, and perhaps remembering. And in the back of her mind, the chilling thought whispered again, "This is where God went to die." Chapter 2. Descent into Silence. The landing was uneventful, too uneventful, Lyra thought. The Argent Wind touched down on the barren, dust-covered plains of Planet X with a gentle thud. The engines stilled, and the quiet was suffocating. Outside, the sky remained that strange, washed-out void, like the world had forgotten how to be alive. Lyra stood by the airlock, staring at the gleaming surface of the planet. The airlock door opened with a hiss, releasing a wave of frigid air. She drew, her breath in sharply, tasting the metallic tang of rust. It felt wrong. The air wasn't supposed to taste like this. "Stay close, keep your helmets on," she ordered as she donned her own. She reached for the rifle slung over her shoulder. Even if they hadn't encountered anything yet, the unease, gnawing at her gut, told her it was only a matter of time. One by one, the rest of the crew filed out. Davin, the reluctant navigator, was the first to step onto the surface. He hesitated for only a moment, the odd sensation of the planet's pull almost tangible in the way his feet sank into the dust. The moment his boot touched the ground, a low hum filled the air. The sound, a vibration deep in the bones, seemed to seep from the very ground they stood on. It was faint at first, but it built, spreading like a wave through the crew. "Do you hear that?" Lieutenant Cor's voice trembled. "It's the planet," Lyra said, her tone harsh with an edge of frustration. She knew they weren't getting the answers they needed from here, but the crew had to keep moving. "Stay alert," they began. Their trek across the plains, the towering ruins of twisted architecture looming in the distance like dark sentinels. The structures, spirals, arches, jagged spires, stretched impossibly high into the pale sky, bending and curving in ways that defied all logic. No symmetry, no pattern. It was as if the planet itself had once been a living thing, and these structures were its bones, twisted and contorted in agony. Every so often, one of the crew would glance back at the ship, as if expecting it to disappear. When they weren't looking, the hum continued, louder now, as if the planet was trying to speak. "Any sign of the previous crew?" Lyra asked, her voice muffled by the helmet's comm system. "No traces, Commander." "Not yet," Davin replied, his tone distant. "The terrain is disorienting, it doesn't make sense." The deeper they moved into the ruins, the more it felt like they were walking through a dream, or a nightmare. Shadows, impossibly long and dark, stretched in every direction. They shouldn't have been able to form at all in the half-light, yet they loomed like ancient ghosts. The air was thick, but it wasn't the dust. It was something else. A weight, a pressure, pushing against their very thoughts. And then they found it, an archway unlike any of the others. It wasn't twisted, wasn't spiraled, but instead perfectly rectangular. It stood alone in the center of a hollowed-out plaza, surrounded by pillars that seemed to be melting into the ground. As they approached, the humming grew louder, vibrating in their chests. Lyra stopped, her hand up in a gesture to halt the others. She could feel it now. An overwhelming pull, like gravity itself, had changed direction. Something was waiting beyond that arch. "Commander," Lieutenant Elara's voice quivered over the comms. "Do you see it? The light?" Lyra glanced. And at first she thought it was a trick of the dim light, but no, it was real. A flicker, a distortion in the air above the archway, like a shimmer in water, warping the space around it. "What is that?" Davin muttered under his breath. The light pulsated again, then faded, and with it, the sound, the hum, fell to an eerie silence. In the stillness, Lyra felt something deep within her, a presence, something watching them, studying them, and it wasn't just the planet anymore. "We need to go through," she said, her voice hard. The feeling was undeniable now. Something was calling to them, pulling them toward the arch. "Commander, this is insane," Elara protested, but Lyra was already moving toward the arch. She couldn't explain why, but the pull was too strong. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something ancient. The team followed, albeit reluctantly, through the archway. The moment they stepped through, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air was colder, and the world beyond was wrong. The sky was darker here, as if they had crossed into another realm. The landscape stretched endlessly, barren and empty, except for the massive circular structure that loomed in the distance, almost too perfectly symmetrical. There was no sign of the previous crew, no markers, only the vast, incomprehensible emptiness. And then the whisper came, not through their comms, not in their heads. It came from the air around them, curling into their ears like a breath, a murmur too quiet to understand, but its presence was undeniable. Lyra's grip tightened on her rifle. The crew stood frozen as though waiting for something, anything, to happen, and then it did. The ground beneath their feet shuddered. The sound came back, louder than before, reverberating through the ground and sky like a roar. The air thickened again, and a figure appeared, distant, far away, but somehow so close. A human figure, but it wasn't a person. It was a memory. "Turn back," it whispered, the voice faint but carrying the weight of centuries. "You are not meant to be here." Lyra's blood ran cold. The figure raised its hand, and before the crew could react, the ground beneath them cracked open, swallowing them whole. Chapter 3. The Abyss will follow shortly. Chapter 3. The abyss. Lyra's stomach lurched as the world dissolved into darkness. The ground split open, and before she could process what was happening, she felt herself plummeting, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the void around her. There was no light, only the sensation of falling through endless blackness. The hum from the planet's surface had returned, vibrating through her body, but now it felt like it was coming from within her bones, rattling her teeth and shaking her soul. Time lost all meaning. The fall seemed eternal, but when her feet finally hit solid ground, the world slammed into focus. She gasped, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts as the sudden weight of gravity pressed down on her. Her helmet's visor cracked, then sealed, locking in her breath, but it didn't protect her from the overwhelming disorientation that assaulted her senses. Dazed, Lyra staggered to her feet, her rifle still clutched in her hands, her mind struggling to orient itself. The team had landed in a vast, cavernous space, its dimensions impossible to comprehend. The ceiling stretched high above them, but it was lost in shadows, the edges of the cavern fading into an unnatural blur. The air here was dense, filled with a thick metallic scent that burned her throat. The ground beneath her boots was slick, almost as if the surface itself were breathing. The walls of the cavern seemed to pulse, ripples moving through the rock, and as she looked closer, she could see strange symbols etched into the stone, lines and shapes that writhed and shifted, as if they had a life of their own. "Commander!" Elara's voice crackled over the comms, filled with panic. "Where are we? What happened?" Lyra shook her head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over her thoughts. The sense of being watched was suffocating here, the feeling that something ancient and patient was observing every movement, every breath they took. "I don't know," Lyra replied, her voice hoarse. She tried to gather her thoughts, but the pressure was building in her head, making it hard to think straight. "Stay together. Stay calm. We need to find a way out of this, whatever this is." The hum had not faded. If anything, It was louder, now, vibrating the very air around them. They had to move, had to understand what this place was. Look. Davin's voice, shaky but clear, cut through the tension. He pointed ahead. There, in the distance, something shimmered. It wasn't light. It was movement, a distortion in the space that made everything else appear static in comparison. A ripple, like water disturbed by something massive. Lyra's pulse quickened as she raised her rifle and motioned for the others to follow her. They began to move toward the shimmering disturbance, their boots clattering against the slick stone. The deeper they moved into the cavern, the more oppressive the silence became, broken only by the hum which now seemed to throb in their chests. As they drew closer to the shimmer, the air began to change. It grew warmer, heavier. Then suddenly the shimmer collapsed inward, and with it, the cavern began to tremble. A massive shape appeared before them. A towering figure, its edges blurring as though it were not fully part of this world. It was humanoid in form, but its proportions were wrong, twisted. Its eyes, if they could even be called that, were deep voids, impossibly black, pulling in all the light around it. The figure spoke, but it wasn't in words. The sound, if it could even be called that, was a vibration, felt deep in their minds rather than heard. It pulsed through them, a whisper of something ancient, something forgotten. "You shouldn't be here." The figure's voice reverberated, through the air, not in their ears, but directly in their skulls. It felt like the voice was demanding them to leave, yet offering them something more, an invitation and a warning all at once. Lyra's knees nearly buckled, but she fought to remain standing. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice a raspy whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile atmosphere. The figure's shape flickered, then solidified again, the edges warping like smoke caught in a gust of wind. "I was once what you call God, and I have forgotten who I am." The words cut through her like a blade. The thing before them wasn't a person, it wasn't a god. It was something worse. "Why are you here?" Lyra asked, her mind struggling to comprehend the gravity of the answer she might receive. "I am the keeper of memory," it replied, its voice still echoing in her mind, filling her skull with an unbearable weight. "I have been waiting, for the ones who will remember, the ones who will free me." The team stood motionless, rooted to the spot by the overwhelming presence of the being before them. The air felt suffocating, the pressure too much to bear. "But I am also a prisoner," the figure continued, its tone growing colder, darker. "This world is a tomb. I cannot leave, I cannot remember because you have forgotten." Lyra's thoughts began to spiral. The fragments of the previous crew, the cryptic warning, the unexplainable distortion of time and space, it all clicked together with sickening clarity. "You've been here all this time, waiting?" she asked, her voice shaking. The figure nodded, a gesture that sent a chill through her entire being. "Waiting for those who would remember and so that I might awaken." Suddenly, the cavern seemed to warp again. The air thickened and the hum began to escalate into a deafening roar. The ground shuddered beneath their feet as cracks began to spread through the stone, revealing something far deeper, far darker. The figure's form trembled, fading in and out like a faulty hologram. "You will not leave," it intoned, its voice growing fainter. Without warning, the cavern began to collapse in on itself, the ground splitting open, and the walls buckling under the immense pressure. Lyra had only a split second to react, her instincts kicking in. "Move!" she screamed. The ground beneath them buckled, sending them tumbling into the yawning abyss. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Path. The world spun in a whirl of darkness and chaotic noise, the roar of the collapsing cavern mingling with the pulsating hum that rattled through their bones. Lyra barely had time to process what was happening before. She felt herself being pulled down, the ground beneath her vanishing as the deep abyss swallowed them whole. She slammed against something hard, the impact jarring every bone in her body, and then the darkness swallowed her again. When her senses returned, It was to an oppressive stillness. She groaned as she pushed herself upright, her helmet fogged with condensation. The ground beneath her was softer now, spongier, as if she had fallen into some sort of organic material. She rubbed her eyes, her vision swimming as she tried to focus. There was no hum anymore, just an eerie silence, thick and suffocating. The cavern had collapsed, yes. But where were they now? Lyra took a deep breath, tasting the metallic tang of the air once more. She tapped the comms in her helmet, but there was no response. The signal had cut off entirely. Her heartbeat quickened as the realization settled in. The others. Davin? Elara, she called out, but her voice sounded hollow in the vast emptiness. She staggered to her feet, her legs unsteady as she began to move. Her head was swimming, the remnants of the figure's voice echoing in her mind, its words twisting and distorting into something unrecognizable. I was once what you call God. I have forgotten who I am. The memory clung to her like a shadow, and with every step, the weight of the figure's words pressed harder against her chest. She had to find the others. They had to be alive. They had to... A flicker of movement ahead caught her eye. She froze, her hand instinctively gripping her rifle as she squinted into the murk ahead of her. Slowly, shapes began to resolve, silhouettes emerging from the fog. Her breath caught as she recognized them. Lyra. Elara's voice was a low, strained whisper, but the relief in it was palpable. The lieutenant's suit was scratched and dented, her helmet cracked, but she was alive. Alive and standing. Behind her, Davin stumbled forward, clutching his helmet like it might slip off at any moment. His face was pale, eyes wide, and there was a dazed look in his gaze. They had all taken the fall. None of them had been prepared for the violence of it, but here they were, alive somehow. Thank God, Lyra muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. I thought, what the hell is this place? Davin cut in, his voice trembling. Where are we? Lyra took in their surroundings. The ground was spongy, covered in thick black moss that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The air was thick, dense with something unknown, and the faint glow of distant light, dim and flickering, seemed to come from nowhere. It was impossible to tell if they were still on Planet X, or if they had somehow crossed over into something far worse, a dimension, or plane that had no name. I don't know, Lyra said, her voice thick with uncertainty. But we have to keep moving. Something is here, something that wants us to remember, and I don't think it's going to stop until we do. Her words hung in the air, unsettling in their truth. They had been brought here for a reason, and the realization of what that reason might be made Lyra's blood run cold. We need to find a way out, a way back to the ship, Elara said, glancing around, her gaze darting over the shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. She sounded far braver than she looked, but Lyra could see the fear in her eyes, mirrored in Davin's expression. Look, Davin pointed ahead, his finger trembling. There, do you see that? Lyra followed his gaze. In the distance, a faint glow illuminated the fog, like the glimmer of a distant fire or a reflection in a darkened mirror. It was faint, but it was a sign, perhaps the only one they had. We need to head toward that light, Lyra decided, the command in her voice returning. Stay sharp. The trio began to move forward, the thick moss crunching underfoot with each step. The air was heavy, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional shift in the shadows, as though the very environment around them was breathing. As they walked, the faint glow became brighter, more tangible. But the further they went, the stranger the landscape became. The black moss began to twist and change shape, becoming more like twisted roots that snaked out of the ground, spreading across the landscape like veins beneath skin. Strange, glowing orbs, like the eyes of some otherworldly predator, floated in the air, their unblinking gaze following their every move. Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, them waiting. The light in the distance flickered again, and then it died, vanishing completely. No, Lyra muttered under her breath. Not now. They kept moving forward, but the landscape around them seemed to warp. The ground began to shift, and the path they had been following was no longer clear. The trees, if they could even be called, that seemed to lean in toward them, their branches twitching like the fingers of something that was alive. A low hum began to fill the air again, softer than before, but unmistakable. "There it is again," Elara said, looking over her shoulder. "The sound, that damn hum." Lyra's pulse quickened. She could feel it now, too. The hum wasn't just a noise, it was a presence. It had a rhythm, a pattern that seemed to tap into something deep inside her, something primal. She could almost hear it in her bones. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them began to tremble once more. A violent shake, like the planet was shifting again. The trees, if they could even be called trees, bent toward them, creaking, as if alive. Out of the corner of her eye, Lyra saw something moving in the distance. A shadow. A figure. She snapped her rifle up, aiming at the form. Her heart raced and her mind screamed that they should run. But her body froze in place. The shadow was moving toward them and it was smiling. Chapter 5. The Edge of Memory. The figure in the distance moved slowly, deliberate and methodical. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as her eyes locked onto it, her finger tightening on the rifle's trigger. But she couldn't make herself pull. Something about the shape, its slow and almost graceful approach made her hesitate, like it wasn't a threat, or maybe like it didn't need to be one. The shadow's outline flickered, warping and stretching unnaturally, then solidified into a humanoid shape. It was tall, unnervingly tall, with a silhouette that shimmered in and out of focus like it was pieced together from scraps of memory and nightmare. The air around it seemed to bend and twist, and Lyra could feel a pressure building in her head, as if the very act of perceiving the figure was forcing her mind into a delicate equilibrium. "Commander," Elara's voice was soft, shaky. "What do we do? What is that thing?" Lyra's grip on her rifle loosened slightly, though her mind screamed at her to be ready for anything. The figure didn't speak. Instead, it kept moving toward them, its shape distorting again, becoming more fluid, almost liquid-like, as though its edges were being erased and reformed with every step. "Stay calm," Lyra said, her voice low, but firm. "No sudden movements, let it come to us." The figure stopped a few feet away, still not speaking. Its presence was overwhelming, not just in a physical sense, but mentally, as if it was weighing them down with a force that transcended gravity. It reached a hand toward them, its fingers long and delicate, but the movement was unnervingly smooth, like a puppet's strings had been pulled by an unseen hand. Lyra instinctively stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the outstretched hand. Her heart was beating so fast now she could barely hear her own thoughts. Everything felt distorted, like she was walking in someone else's dream, trapped in a space that wasn't quite reality, but not quite illusion either. The air shifted. Again, the shadows around them deepened, closing in as the figure's hand hovered before her. A strange, unearthly hum filled the air, growing louder, rising in frequency until it felt like it was vibrating directly in her skull. And then, the figure spoke, not in words, but in pure thought, slipping into Lyra's mind as easily as breathing. "I know you." The voice wasn't human. It was deeper than that, older, as if it came from the very bones of the planet itself. Lyra stumbled back, the impact of the words rattling her. "You, what are you?" she demanded, her voice coming out more ragged than she intended. "Who are you?" The figure didn't respond with words, but a deep, resonating pulse echoed in the air, and the world around them began to warp again. The shadows bent unnaturally, twisting into long, spindly shapes that seemed to claw at the very fabric of existence. In an instant, Lyra was no longer standing in the spongy, twisted forest. The ground beneath her vanished, replaced by a vast, empty blackness. A cold wind howled through the void. She gasped, her lungs burning as she tried to breathe, but the air tasted stale, heavy with an ancient weight that pressed down on her. Chest around her, shapes began to appear, slowly at first, flickers of memory. Faces, places, moments. The crew members, her father, long-lost fragments of the past. They passed before her like broken pieces of a dream, too fleeting to grasp. Then came the voices. You should have stayed away. You are not supposed to remember. You were... The voices twisted into something unintelligible, all overlapping, all speaking at once. Lyra clutched her head, the cacophony unbearable. She felt her knees buckle beneath her as the world around her shifted again. The shadows, the faces, the voices, they weren't just memories. They were fragments of something much older, echoes of something that had existed before the stars, before time itself had begun to form. Through the chaos, the figure's presence remained, unchanged, unwavering, like a silent observer at the center of an ever-changing storm. And then it spoke again, not in words, but in an unspoken understanding. This is the edge of memory, the place where all things forgotten gather. Lyra's heart beat erratically as the revelation settled in. This place, this world, was not merely a physical location. It was something much more, something transcendent, a threshold between what was and what had been lost, a place for things that were no longer part of time. The realization hit her like a wave, knocking the wind out of her. The previous crew had fallen victim to it. The figure. They were all here, trapped in the remnants of something forgotten. The planet, the ruins, the shadowy figure, they were all a manifestation of something that was waiting for someone to arrive, to remember, to wake it up. But why them? Lyra's legs shook, and she tried to take a step back, but her body wouldn't move. The pressure in her chest intensified. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and heavy, drowning out the voices that still swirled in her mind. The figure, as if sensing her thoughts, tilted its head, its form shifting again, becoming more human, more solid. Its eyes, those dark, empty voids, focused on her, and Lyra felt the weight of an eternity in those depths. You are the ones who will remember, the figure intoned, its voice growing colder. You, and those who follow. You are the link that binds the past to the present. But this is where it ends. This is where all things forgotten come to die. Lyra's mind reeled. The crew? Was this what happened to them? Was this the fate that awaited them too? Trapped in the remnants of time itself, caught in the echo of a god that had been forgotten? No, she couldn't let it happen. She wouldn't. In a desperate act of defiance, Lyra tore her gaze from the figure, searching for anything, any way to break free. Her thoughts were racing, and with every passing second, the pressure in her mind grew. She was losing herself to this place, to this memory that refused to let go. But then, something snapped. She didn't know what it was. Maybe it was the sound of Elara's voice breaking through the fog. Maybe it was the sudden, violent jolt of the ground beneath her feet. But something broke the mental grip the figure had on her, and in that instant she turned away from it. The ground cracked open. "Run!" Lyra screamed. "We need to get out of here, now!" Chapter 6. Fractured Reality. The earth trembled beneath Lyra's feet, and with a sharp crack the ground split open, sending jagged lines through the blackened surface. Her heart raced as she stumbled backward, the dark figure's presence lingering. In the corner of her vision, the oppressive weight of its gaze still pressing against her mind. She couldn't look back. Not now. "We need to move," Lyra shouted again, her voice desperate, but it seemed to fall on deaf ears. Davin and Elara were frozen in place, their eyes wide, still trapped in the same trance that had gripped Lyra only moments before. The shock of the encounter had knocked the breath from them, leaving them paralyzed, their limbs heavy with confusion and fear. "Snap out of it," Lyra barked, forcing herself to step toward them. She grabbed Elara by the shoulder, shaking her hard. "We're not staying here. Do you understand?" Elara blinked, her eyes flickering as she refocused. "What? What happened? Where are we?" Lyra didn't have an answer. She couldn't make sense of the surreal nightmare they were caught in. The landscape itself was warping, shifting like fluid in a storm. The air, thick and suffocating, seemed to bend and stretch, distorting their vision, creating waves of heat that made it feel like they were walking through a furnace. "We need to get to higher ground, find some kind of shelter," Lyra said, trying to steady her breath. "Whatever that thing was, it's not letting us go. We have to move before—" A sudden violent tremor shook the ground beneath them. The rift in the earth yawned wider, swallowing the ground between them and their path forward. The jagged edges of the chasm seemed to pulse with energy, the shadows inside it writhing like something alive. A low, guttural growl reverberated from the depths, and for a moment, Lyra thought she saw a flicker of movement, a massive, shifting shape, its outline barely visible against the blackness. "Move!" Lyra screamed, grabbing Davin's arm, yanking him toward the edge of the rift. He stumbled, his legs still weak from the overwhelming pressure they'd felt earlier, but he managed to stay on his feet. "What is that thing?" he gasped, his voice thick with dread. "I don't know, but it's not something we want to meet," Lyra replied, her mind racing. "Whatever it is, we don't have the luxury of finding out." With Elara at her side, and Davin trailing just behind, they scrambled toward a jagged outcrop of stone, half hidden in the mist. The ground continued to quake as the distant growls grew louder, and Lyra could feel the pull of the planet itself, as though it were trying to drag them down into its depths. They made it to the outcrop, panting, their bodies tense with adrenaline. The moment they reached the cover of the jagged stone, they paused, catching their breath. Lyra's heart was still pounding, but the immediate danger had passed, at least for now. "We need to assess the situation," Lyra said, her voice low, her eyes scanning the horizon. She could see the remnants of the shattered landscape stretching into the distance, the remnants of what was once solid ground now shattered and warped beyond recognition. The world was unraveling at the seams, bending and breaking with every passing second. "There's no way this is just a natural phenomenon," Elara said, her voice steady, but there was an edge of fear in her eyes. "This place, it's not real. It can't be." Lyra nodded slowly, her mind still spinning from the encounter with the figure. The atmosphere felt like it was on the verge of collapsing. It was as if the very fabric of reality was fraying around them, a place where the rules didn't apply, where time and space were stretched and twisted until they no longer made sense. "This planet—" Lyra's voice trailed off, a heavy weight in her chest. "It's not just a place, it's a memory, a fractured memory, a place where all things forgotten gather. That thing, the one we saw, it's part of that. It's what this world is, and it's trying to pull us into its history." "Then we need to remember," Elara said, her words sharp, almost defiant. Chapter 7. The echo of souls the moment the words left Elara's mouth. An eerie stillness fell over them. The wind ceased its howling, and the low rumble of the shifting landscape died down, leaving only the faint hum, the one that had been with them since their arrival. It reverberated deep inside Lyra's chest, a constant reminder that something was watching, listening, waiting. For a long moment they stood in silence, unsure of what to do next. The world around them felt like a broken mirror, distorted, shifting, and pulling at the edges of their sanity. Each passing second felt like a fragile thread that could snap at any moment, plunging them into madness. "We need to keep moving," Lyra said at last, her voice quieter than usual, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile calm that had descended. She turned away from the jagged stone outcrop, scanning the horizon for any sign of a way forward. "There's something we're missing. Something about this place that we're not seeing." Davin, who had been silently watching the shifting landscape, slowly nodded. "I'm not sure what we're supposed to do here, but whatever it is, it's tied to this memory, maybe even created by it." Elara's eyes were focused ahead, the distant glow of something, an anomaly or a beacon, barely visible through the haze. "If this world is a memory, then it must have a reason for existing. Maybe it's trying to communicate with us, or maybe it's trying to force us to remember something. I don't think we're the ones who need to remember," Lyra muttered. She thought back to the encounter with the figure, the deep, ancient voice that had slipped into her mind, the cryptic words about the forgotten, The past. The memory. I think it's something else trying to remember. Or reawaken. Davin turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. You think it's trying to bring something back? Lyra nodded. Yes, something it lost, or something that was taken from it. And we've stumbled right into the middle of it. The thought hit her. With a sickening clarity. This wasn't just a planet, it was a tomb. A prison for something far older than they could imagine. And whatever it was, it had been waiting. Forgotten by time, perhaps abandoned by the universe itself. We need to find answers, Lyra said, her voice firm now. We can't stay here and hope this all resolves on its own. We have to figure out what this thing wants from us. The hum grew louder, almost imperceptible at first, but now it seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. It was as if the planet itself were resonating with the pulse of an ancient machine. A heartbeat that had been silent for eons, but was now beginning to wake. Do you hear that? Elara asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lyra nodded grimly. It's here again. Suddenly a shadow moved across the landscape. A figure, dark and formless, sliding across the twisted horizon. It was like the shadows themselves were alive, creeping closer and closer, their edges sharp and jagged. Without warning, the shadow broke apart, revealing the shape of the figure from before. The one with the distorted outline, the one who had whispered into Lyra's mind. It stood still for a moment, just watching them, and then its form began to shimmer, distort, and reform, like it was piecing itself back together from fragments of some shattered memory. Elara stepped forward, but Lyra grabbed her arm. Don't. It's not real. None of this is real. It's real enough to hurt us, Elara whispered back, her grip tightening around the weapon at her side. But I don't think it's here to kill us. Not yet. The figure spoke again, not in words, but in an echo of thought, louder this time. It slipped into their minds like a cold wind, filling the empty spaces between them. You are not the first to come. The message was clear, yet unfathomable. Lyra could feel its weight press against her, but she refused to give in to the dread clawing at her mind. You've been waiting for us, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. What are you? What do you want? The figure did not respond directly. Instead, the shadows surrounding it writhed, as if alive, wrapping around the world like a shroud. And then, with a sudden and violent rush, the figure was the shadow, merging with it until it disappeared entirely, leaving nothing but the silence of the broken world. What the hell was that? Davin muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. Elara's gaze swept across the horizon where the shadows seemed to be gathering, pulling in on themselves. It was like the landscape itself was being drawn into the figure, into something far darker than they had yet encountered. It's trying to show us something, Lyra said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Something it doesn't want us to forget. We're getting closer, Elara said, determination flaring in her eyes. Whatever it is, we need to find it. We need to uncover the truth before it swallows us whole. But Lyra wasn't so sure anymore. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into a world that wasn't just alien. It was ancient. A place where time had no meaning, and the very fabric of existence seemed to be unraveling. It wasn't just a place. They had stepped into a memory, a waking nightmare, and whatever was waiting for them wasn't done yet. Something else was stirring beneath the surface, something far older and more dangerous than anything they could comprehend. And Lyra had the distinct feeling that if they didn't find the answers soon, they would be lost to the void, swallowed by the dark heart of Planet X. We need to keep moving, Lyra said again, her voice a steel thread of command. We can't stop now, not until we know what's at the core of this. The others didn't need further urging. With a renewed sense of urgency, they pushed forward, deeper into the fractured reality of Planet X. The air grew thicker, more oppressive with every step. Shadows clung to them, whispers curled around their minds, and with each passing moment, Lyra felt herself losing something. Something she couldn't name, something slipping through her fingers. The deeper they ventured, the less they could trust what they saw. Was it the planet's broken memory? Or was it something else entirely, something far more dangerous? Chapter 8. The Heart of Darkness. The further they traveled, the less the landscape resembled anything tangible. The shattered plains of obsidian dust that had once stretched in every direction now gave way to towering structures, twisted spires, of metal and stone, their surfaces slick and shimmering like liquid glass. Their designs were alien, incomprehensible, with angles that made no sense and proportions that defied the laws of geometry. It was as if the entire city had been constructed by a mind that saw the world not in 3 dimensions, but in something far stranger, more fluid, more fractured. The sky above them had darkened further, becoming a swirling mass of iridescent black and gray, a storm without form, endlessly shifting as though alive. There were no stars. There was no sun. There was only the oppressive, watchful void that seemed to draw every thought into itself. Each step they took was accompanied by the low hum, now louder, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere, beneath, their feet, in the air, even in their skulls, a constant drone that pulsed in rhythm with their hearts. "Where are we?" Elara whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. Her eyes darted around, scanning the impossible architecture and the shifting shadows that seemed to follow them, inching closer with each step. "We're close," Lyra replied, though the words felt hollow. She wasn't sure anymore whether she was speaking to Elara, to herself, or to something else entirely. "Whatever is pulling us here, it's at the heart of this place. We're getting closer to it. The thing that remembers." Davin was silent, his face pale as he glanced at the looming structures. His eyes were haunted, drawn to the shadows that crawled along the surfaces of the alien towers. This place wasn't built for us," he muttered. "It wasn't meant for anything to survive here." Lyra couldn't disagree. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible light, but it wasn't a light that gave comfort. It was the kind of light that made the shadows deeper, darker, more threatening. The air tasted wrong here, metallic and bitter, like the residue of something long forgotten and buried beneath the surface. They continued through the narrow, winding paths between the spires, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the eerie silence. The ground beneath them felt unstable, like it could give way at any moment. With every step, Lyra's anxiety grew. She knew they were close to something. The sensation was palpable, a crawling, nauseating presence that was too ancient, too vast to comprehend fully. At the heart of the twisted city they found it, a massive structure, no, a monument, loomed in the center of a vast plaza. Its shape, so impossible that it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The tower, if it could even be called that, seemed to stretch beyond the sky, piercing the fabric of reality itself. Its surface was covered in swirling symbols, intricate carvings that moved like liquid, their meaning defying all understanding. Light, cold light, seeped from its cracks, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground, stretching out like tendrils. It was not a building. It was something else. Something that had never been meant to stand still. "The core," Lyra breathed, her voice barely audible as the overwhelming sense of wrongness pressed in on her from all sides. "This is where it's all centered. This is where it's waiting." As they approached the monument, the ground beneath them began to vibrate in earnest. The air thickened, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. Lyra's vision swam. She could hear the faint whispers again, the same voices that had taunted her in her mind earlier, the same voices that had spoken through the shadows. "You are close, too close. It has begun. It is waking." The monument shifted. Slowly, impossibly, it began to open, its surface splitting apart in long, vertical seams, revealing a hollow core within. It wasn't a door that opened, but rather a rupture in space itself. Inside there was only darkness, an endless, consuming black that seemed to pull in all light, as if it were a mouth ready to swallow everything. "No turning back," Lyra said, her voice barely audible over the growing hum. "We've come this far, whatever it is, we need to confront it." She stepped forward, her boots echoing loudly in the tense silence. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to turn around and leave, to run before the world around them collapsed into oblivion. But there was something deeper inside her, something primal that urged her onward. There was no escaping this, not now, not after everything they had seen. Elara followed her, her face pale but her eyes burning with the same resolve. Davin hesitated only for a moment before falling in behind them. He had no choice, not now. They had all crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. Together they entered the rift, the opening expanding before them like the mouth of a great beast. The air grew colder, and the oppressive hum reached a crescendo, vibrating through their bones. The darkness inside the monument felt alive, its weight heavy and suffocating. And then, as if it had been waiting for them all along, the darkness spoke. "You have come. I have waited. For you." The voice was not just heard, it was felt. A presence, in the mind, the very essence of a thing too vast to understand. It was not a voice that could be contained by sound. It was a presence, a memory, a soul that had waited for eons to be awakened. Lyra's heart raced, her breath shallow. She couldn't see it, not yet, but she could feel it. The thing that had been forgotten, the thing that had been trapped, buried, waiting for someone to remember. "I don't know what you are," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking, "but I will stop you." There was a long pause. The hum of the planet seemed to stop, as though everything held its breath, and then the voice answered, its tone cold, ancient, and filled with an unfathomable sadness. "You will try, but this world is already lost." Chapter 9. The waking nightmare. The darkness inside the monument pressed in on them, thick and suffocating, like a living, breathing thing that had lain dormant for an eternity. The air was dense with the weight of memory, a forgotten past, a lost existence. Lyra could feel it clawing at the edges of her mind, whispering in a language older than time itself. "You are so close." The voice was inside her head now, not just words, but sensations, feelings, memories that weren't hers, flashing in the darkness, the weight of a forgotten history, the pain of something that had been trapped, buried, sealed away for eons. Lyra staggered, her hand shooting out to steady herself against the cold, jagged surface of the monument. Her head spun, her thoughts fragmented, as though the very fabric of her consciousness was being unraveled by the ancient presence. "What is this?" she gasped, fighting to stay grounded. "What are you?" "I am nothing. I am everything. I am the emptiness that lies between the stars, the shadow that hides in the corners of time." The voice surged again, its presence now suffocating, overwhelming. She could feel it pressing in, pushing against her mind, filling her with a sense of loss, a loss that wasn't hers, but one that she could feel down to her very core. "I was forgotten, abandoned, cast aside." Elara reached out, grabbing Lyra's arm, her face pale with fear. "Lyra, what's happening? You're shaking." Lyra couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. The voice, the thing, was consuming her thoughts, drowning her in its ancient grief. "But now you have come. You, the trespassers, the seekers. You have come to awaken me. You have come to remember me." The monument trembled, its dark core pulsing with an unholy light. Lyra could feel it, a deep, resonant vibration that shook the very air, reverberating through her chest like the heartbeat of something ancient and terrible. It was alive. It was waking. "Get back!" Lyra gasped, shaking herself free of the voice's hold. "We need to get out of here now." But it was too late. A crack split the air, a sound like the tearing of reality itself. And then, the darkness in the monument seemed to bleed out, spilling across the plaza, pouring over the jagged surfaces of the twisted spires spreading like a disease. The very fabric of the world seemed to warp, twist, and bend, the laws of physics becoming suggestions rather than rules. The ground beneath them cracked open, huge fissures splitting wide, revealing dark chasms that seemed to stretch into infinity. The shadows that had followed them now gathered, coiling around them, seeping into their skin, filling their minds with ancient, unfathomable truths. "No," Lyra screamed, fighting against the pull of the darkness. "This is not your world anymore." But the darkness was not listening. It was remembering. With a final, terrible roar, the monument erupted. The rift at its core widened, tearing apart. The space around them, light, the cold, oppressive light, blasted outward, cascading in waves that distorted the world, pulling at the edges of reality itself. Lyra felt her body jerked forward, as though something was yanking her into the abyss. But she wasn't alone. Elara screamed as the rift's force pulled at her, her hands gripping Lyra's sleeve. Davin's face twisted in terror as he struggled to keep his footing, his legs buckling beneath him as the ground heaved violently beneath them. "This is it," Davin shouted, his voice breaking. "We're going to die here." The dark presence laughed. It wasn't a sound but a feeling, cold, mocking, ancient. It resonated within them all, flooding their minds with images of things far worse than death, of endless darkness, of being consumed by time itself. "This is not your end," the voice whispered, wrapping around them like a cold, suffocating embrace. "This is just the beginning." And then, in an instant, the world collapsed. The plaza, the monument, the very fabric of reality. They all crumbled, shattered into nothingness. The darkness poured over them, dragging them down, down into a place beyond time, beyond comprehension. Lyra's body felt like it was being pulled apart, stretched beyond its limits. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She couldn't remember. But there was something, a flicker of light, a distant voice. Remember. She clung to it, holding on to the fading thread of consciousness. Through the darkness, she heard Elara's voice, faint and far away, but still there. "Lyra, Lyra, we can't let it take us." "It will take you," the voice crooned, its tone dripping with inevitability. "It will take all of you. You are nothing but fragments, echoes, shadows of the past." Lyra's vision blurred, the world twisted, and then she saw it, a glimmer of something, a memory, a fragment of the past, frozen in time, a face, a voice, a place bathed in light, so unlike the darkness that surrounded them now. It was familiar, it was home. And then the world fell silent. Chapter 10. The final choice Lyra's mind was a whirl of fractured thoughts. The darkness had consumed everything, her senses, her surroundings, her very identity. The last remnants of reality twisted and blurred, like a bad dream she couldn't wake from. Her limbs felt like lead, heavy and unresponsive, and her heart beat slowly, sluggishly, as if time itself had stalled. And yet, there was something. A spark, a sliver of light in the endless void. A thought, faint and fragile like a whisper, in the back of her mind. "Remember." The word echoed again, pulling at the very core of her being. It wasn't just a command, it was a lifeline, a thread in the suffocating blackness. Lyra fought to cling to it, to grasp the memory that was slipping away from her like water through her fingers. She could feel herself being torn in every direction. There was no ground beneath her, no up or down, just a swirling mass of dark energy, a cold and indifferent force pulling at her soul. Remember. She clenched her fists, pushing against the weight of the void. She knew she had to fight. She had to. And then, just as she thought she would lose herself to the endless dark, a pulse of warmth filled her. It started as a flicker, but quickly grew into something tangible, something powerful, a force beyond. The dark, something primal and pure. The light cut through the shadows like a blade, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she could see. Not with her eyes, but with her soul. She was falling. No, rising. The ground beneath her solidified, and her senses snapped back into place like a forgotten puzzle clicking together. She could feel the cold wind on her skin. She could hear the crackling of burning embers, the faint hum of distant machinery. The air was thin, metallic, like the dust of Planet X, but now, different. Alive. She stood on solid ground. With shaking hands, Lyra reached for her helmet, trying to tear it off, desperate to see the world around her with her own eyes. The helmet clicked, the seal breaking. She pulled it away, gasping for breath, her eyes wide as they adjusted to the dim light that now surrounded her. What was this place? The landscape stretched before her, distant hills, jagged rock formations, and beneath a sky that was not quite black, not quite anything. A single city stretched into the distance, its towering spires twisted, stretching upward toward a point of light, a shining core at its heart. Lyra's pulse quickened. She wasn't alone. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Elara and Davin stood beside her, looking as disoriented as she felt. They were on their knees, their hands pressed against the ground, as if the earth itself were calling to them. The same hum she had felt earlier, the hum of the monument, the hum of the forgotten memory, seemed to pulse from beneath their feet. What? What happened? Elara whispered, looking up at Lyra, her voice shaking. Where are we? Lyra's mind was racing. She didn't know where they were, but it felt familiar. The air, the light, the very pulse beneath her feet. It was as if they had stepped into a memory, a place locked away for eons. And yet, it was more than just a memory. It was real, solid, but also broken, fractured. I think we're inside it, Lyra said, her voice hoarse as if waking from a dream. Inside the memory, inside whatever this is. Davin stood shakily, wiping his brow. His eyes were wide, his gaze flicking around them in confusion. But how? How is this possible? We were just... He stopped short, his face paling as his eyes fell on the monument behind them. The massive rift they had entered was no longer there. Instead, the space around them had transformed into something else. An endless stretch of gray ruins, half lit by that distant core. Shadows clung to the edges of the city, making the whole place seem alive yet dead. We didn't escape, Davin said softly, dread filling his voice. We entered. Lyra felt her heart lurch in her chest as the gravity of his words sank in. They had been sucked into whatever had been waiting, whatever had been pulling them into the void. The thing that had spoken to them, that ancient entity, was here, but not in the way they had expected. They weren't just trapped in its presence. They had crossed a threshold. They had stepped into its world, its domain, and it was waiting. It was watching. A faint sound reached their ears, a low, eerie hum that vibrated through the ground, growing stronger with each passing second. Lyra. Look. Elara's voice was tense. She pointed toward the horizon, her hand trembling. At the far end of the distant city, something moved. It was too far away to make out clearly, but the shape was unmistakable. A figure, a silhouette that seemed to shimmer in the light, its form shifting in impossible ways. No, it wasn't just a figure. It was the monument, or something that had been the monument. Now it towered above the city, stretching upward into the fractured sky, its form broken and scarred as though it had been rebuilt in haste. Part machine, part memory, part shadow, and it was coming toward them. You have come to the heart, the voice whispered again, not in words, but in the tremor of the air, the shudder of the ground beneath them. It filled their minds, their bodies like an irresistible force. You have come to remember me, to give me a name, to set me free. Lyra's hands trembled as the realization hit her. The thing they had encountered, the dark entity, had not been a god. It was not a force beyond the stars. It was a remnant, a forgotten presence cast aside and lost. It had been locked in this place, this memory, waiting for the right moment, the right beings to awaken it, to bring it back, and they had done it. But there was one thing the entity had not accounted for. One thing Lyra and her crew had that it had forgotten. A choice. Lyra, Elara said softly, stepping forward, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have to let it win." Lyra turned to face her, the weight of Elara's words settling like a heavy stone in her chest. "What do we do? How do we stop it?" Elara reached into her pack, pulling out a small crystalline device, a relic from their ship's wreckage, something they had salvaged long ago. "We remember," Elara said simply. "We choose to forget." For the first time, Lyra felt a strange calm wash over her. Whatever this place was, whatever the entity was, it didn't matter. They still had a choice, and she would never let it take them. Epilogue. The endless horizon, the wind was still. It should have been unsettling, but for the first time since they had entered the heart of Planet X, it felt right. The oppressive hum that had vibrated through the ground, through their bones, was gone. The presence that had pressed on their minds, tugging at the edges of their thoughts, had receded, no longer a suffocating weight. Lyra stood at the edge of the city, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the distant core once shined, with cold, inescapable light. Now there was only a vast emptiness. The broken spires of the city stretched toward a sky that no longer twisted or bent, but simply was. The memory was fading. Not just the memory of Planet X, but the presence, the voice that had haunted them, the ancient force that had waited for eons to return. It was being erased, slipping away into the dark void that had once been its domain. For the first time since they had arrived, Lyra felt the pull of freedom. She could feel Elara and Davin behind her, their footsteps quiet on the dust-covered ground. The landscape around them, once so alien and oppressive, now seemed to settle into something more familiar, less a place of torment, more a place of quiet contemplation. The twisted ruins had begun to lose their edge, the unnatural angles softening, as if the world was trying to find a new shape. "Do you think we did it?" Elara asked softly, her voice almost lost in the vast silence that stretched around them. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She glanced back at her friends, her crew, her family in all the ways that mattered. Elara's face was streaked with dirt, her eyes tired but steady, a quiet strength in them. Davin, though still pale, looked less haunted. There was a flicker of something, hope maybe, behind his weary eyes. "I don't know," Lyra said at last, her voice steady but uncertain. "But we're still here, we made it out, and that means something." Davin let out a quiet, almost reluctant laugh. "Not sure if that means victory or just the next chapter of this nightmare." Lyra smiled faintly, though the weight of the unknown still pressed against her. "Does it matter? We have a chance now. A real one." They stood together for a moment, each of them taking in the profound stillness of the world around them. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of possibility. They had come to this place believing it was the end, but in reality, it had been only a beginning that lay far beyond the planet, far beyond the dark horizon they had crossed. "Whatever happens," Elara said quietly, "we're not going back, not to what was." Lyra nodded, her gaze drifting once more to the horizon, now fading into a soft glow of light. There was no sun here, but it didn't matter. For the first time, she realized there didn't have to be. Light existed in many forms, in many ways. And this place, this broken world, could be whatever they chose to make it. "What now?" Davin asked, his voice full of a quiet resolve. "We rebuild," Lyra said, her voice firm, her heart steady. "We start again. We take what we've learned and we make something new, a future, a new horizon." Lyra didn't know where they would go from here, whether this was just another test or the beginning of something greater. But for the first time since they had landed on Planet X, she didn't feel like she was running. She didn't feel like she was waiting for something to consume her or for some forgotten memory to swallow her whole. She felt alive. She felt free. And with that, she stepped forward into the unknown. The horizon was vast, endless, but this time, it was theirs to cross. The end. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.